This is 9-6 uniform, one of our 172s hooked up for overnight. It's got the blanket on top of the cowl. The blanket makes a big difference in heat retention from our heat source to get this airplane nice and warm for the next day's flying. The battery tender is hooked up. The battery tender is a very high-tech battery maintainer. It will not boil the battery dry is the neat thing about it. So we always want to use these battery tenders. If you can zoom in here, Mike, there's two lights on the front of this battery tender. The red light comes on when the battery is actively charging. If you hook this battery tender up and this red light flashes, blinks on and off, there is some problem either with the battery or with the connection. Disconnect the battery tender and call maintenance. Call Bill Hammond, 770-845-0250, and report if this light is flashing red. The green light indicates the condition of the battery. If this green light is blinking on and off, that means the battery has achieved 80% of its charge. When this green light goes steady green, the battery is now fully charged and the battery tender is in maintain mode. As the voltage drops, the battery tender comes on. When the voltage comes up, the battery tender turns off and internally disconnects itself. This is the correct hookup for 9-6 uniform. 9-6 uniform, we had a preheater that was attached to the oil sump of this engine. About 6 months ago, that preheater, for some reason or another, burned up. It's not uncommon. They're fail-safe. It didn't create any problem other than it quit working. For the short term, we're going to use a drop light to generate some heat inside this cowling. This drop light has a 100-watt bulb in it, and as long as it's laying on top of the battery box and not touching any of this wiring, it'll be fine. It gets hot enough that it could melt the insulation off of this wiring, so make sure it's not touching any of the wiring and make sure it's turned on. We have it turned off now because the bright light was affecting the video, but make sure at this switch right here that you turn the light on when you're leaving it. The battery tender hooks up right there. Unhooked and then hooked up. The hookup is fail-safe. You can't hook it up wrong, so that's pretty much self-explanatory. After you get these connections made inside, just close the oil access door and fold the blanket over. Now, one quick word about disconnecting when you go flying. Obviously, you have to disconnect the battery tender right here, like that. You also have to disconnect the battery tender. You also have to disconnect the battery tender where it's plugged into the wall, like that. If you leave this battery tender plugged in and lay it off to the side here, it consumes a small amount of electricity, which has no effect for us except running up our electrical bill. This is 9-4 Lima, one of the other 172s, and the preheating lash up is very, very similar to 9-6 uniform. You can see the blanket in place, the battery charger on top of the blanket, the wires leading in through the oil access door. There's a little difference on the hookup on this one, so let's cut away for just a minute. When we come back, we'll show you inside this cowling. This is where the hookup differs slightly on 9-4 Lima. The battery tender is the same connection, the same no-fool connection. You can't hook it up incorrectly. The battery tender itself is plugged in right here. The difference is this airplane has a reef preheater on the oil pan, and this plug plugs that preheater in, which applies heat directly to the oil sump. So it's a much more efficient method of preheating the airplane. When we build up when we build up the new engine for 9-6 uniform, we will install again one of these preheaters on the oil sump on that airplane, so it'll be easy and efficient like this one. This is 5.2 X-ray, and again, the hookup is very similar, the battery tender on top of the cowling. The difference on this airplane lies in the fact that we don't have a quick connect on the battery. You actually have to hook up the alligator clamps from the battery tender to the correct post. And if you can look right down where I'm pointing with my finger, that's the positive post on the master solenoid. That goes directly to the positive post of the battery. Hook the red clip at this position and hook the black clip on any bare metal for a ground. In this case, we've got it hooked on the nut of the bolt that holds the engine mount on. You can also hook it up to any bare metal that you can get a hold of in here. The screw studs on the crankcase are a good place to hook it up. Interestingly, when we first opened the cowl door on this one, the ground was hooked up to the engine mount itself, which is painted. The paint is a good insulator, so we weren't getting a good circuit there. You also see we've got a preheater installed on the oil sump of this airplane, so that keeps it warmed up very nicely. This is 5.3 Yankee, the Citabria that's part of the club. Has the same deal with the blanket over the top when we're preheating. There's an extension cord runs from the corner of the hangar over, and this airplane also has a preheater installed. Right there's the plug-in for it. You just plug that in. This airplane, the battery is located clear back in the tail, beyond the reach of anybody but a mechanic who's a gymnast. So we're not putting the battery charger on this airplane as a matter of routine. Only the oil pan heater gets hooked up on this airplane. And that gives you a brief overview of hooking the airplanes up when you're done flying for the day, hooking the heaters up and also hooking the battery chargers up. Thanks for watching. We'll see you another time.